Today, I'm going to share 5 types of emotionally immature parents. Now, if you grew up in a home with emotionally immature parents, you might have always had this feeling that something was just off. Maybe you had to be the parent in the home to your siblings or to your parents themselves. Or maybe you just felt really distant from your parent, but you didn't really know why or couldn't really put your finger on what was going on or creating the distance. Now, we can all feel empowered when we begin to understand the behaviors and the reactions of our emotionally immature parents. Instead of taking it personally or believing that we're unworthy or that we're unlovable, as is the case when we have emotionally immature parents, we can begin to understand that their behavior was actually just a reflection of their own emotional capacity and not a reflection of us at all. So, now I'm going to break down 5 different types of emotionally immature parents. The first type is what I'm calling a reactive parent. This parent is always on an emotional roller coaster. Sometimes they're in a really great mood, and seemingly out of nowhere, their mood could shift, sometimes in a really drastic way. They might even start screaming or yelling. Ultimately, we never know which side of them we're going to get because they're so inconsistent in their behavior. And what's really going on is that this person, this reactive parent, is actually relying on everyone else in the home to emotionally regulate themselves. So when something changes, or anytime they feel like they lost control in some way, or someone else's moods shift in some way, they tend to spiral emotionally. And this is really confusing for us to be around them because a lot of times we end up wondering why they're having such a big reaction. Internally, they're feeling really overwhelmed and they don't know how to understand or process their feelings. So in reality, these small things can become really big things, which only makes us and everyone else around them captive to their mood. And in this way, when we end up shifting or changing our behavior to cater to their mood, it actually rewards the reactive parent subconsciously because the entire system, the family members, us included, usually end up focusing on pleasing and appeasing them, of course, to keep their reaction under control. Now, a lot of people who grew up with this type of parent naturally then end up being hypervigilant or always looking, waiting for the next shoe to drop or for the person's mood, someone else's mood, to shift or change. They might end up startling at the slightest noise or just simply feeling on edge anytime they notice someone else's mood shifts. And what this really is, it's an adaptive response that came from one time having to actually focus on our reactive parent growing up. And so as a result, now we end up struggling to relax and we end up struggling then to trust other people around us because we assume everyone is going to be just as unpredictable as our reactive parent. The second type of emotionally immature parent is what I'm calling a disconnected parent. This is a parent who's shut down or in a freeze state of nervous system activation. They're physically present, but emotionally, they're not present at all. And a lot of times these parents actually believe that parenting is really only about those basic things like providing shelter and providing food. And if they believe that it's only the basics that matter, they're not going to be able to give guidance or to emotionally support their children. A lot of times because they're repeating what they themselves got from their own parents. They believe to some extent this is just the normal way to parent, focusing on the basics, emotions don't really matter. Most people who grew up with this disconnected parent end up feeling like they're living with a distant stranger, someone they don't really feel connected to, or don't really feel a deep sense of closeness around. They usually don't feel comfortable talking to their parents and sometimes even others about their own issues and end up a lot of times hiding, being secret about certain parts of their lives. This comes from feeling uncomfortable expressing themselves. We end up struggling with conflict in relationships, and sometimes we end up struggling to tolerate other people when they're expressing their emotions. We might shut down or freeze just like our parent did to us. A third type of emotionally immature parent is what I'm calling the perfectionistic parent. Now, this is someone who's over-focused on appearance. Now, like all of the emotionally immature parents, they struggle with their own self-esteem, and they cope through their child, who becomes the only way that they themselves as the parent can end up feeling worthy. They end up intensely pushing their kids to excel, maybe academically, maybe athletically, or maybe just to be overall perfect, never show any imperfections, never make any mistakes. Now, of course, most parents want what's best for their children. And there is nothing wrong with putting a focus on success, whether you believe it comes academically, athletically, or however it is that you believe success happens. But this perfectionistic parent takes us to the next level, where they're only giving love and approval and validation when their child is achieving in some way. And a lot of times, they end up removing love, approval, and validation when their child makes mistakes, or when they end up falling short, or when they're imperfect. Over time, this teaches us as children that the only way that we're worthy of love is when we're achieving or when we're performing. And a lot of the time, we didn't end up getting time in childhood to just be a kid, to just play, to just do things that we wanted to do because we were interested, because we were curious, because we wanted to explore. As a result, having a perfectionistic parent can end up translating into having an extreme fear of failure, where we might not even want to try something new or to try something that we know we're not good at. And we might be hard on ourselves when we try anything at all. Sometimes we're even too scared to even put ourselves out there. And we have a high level of anxiety, always worrying that everyone around us is holding us to that same unrealistic standard that our perfectionistic parent did at one time. A fourth type of emotionally immature parent is what I'm calling the critical parent. Now, this is a parent that projects their own feelings of inadequacy and low self-worth onto their child, right? And this can look like a parent who just stands over their child all the time, telling them when they're not doing something right, telling them how they would do something, or who only makes negative comments, only points out the bad, the worse, the imperfection. Or maybe this is a parent who regularly makes jokes or mocks the child. A lot of times, a parent like this might even believe that they are giving tough love, thinking that being harsh or critical prepares the child for the real world, to toughen up, to deal with the stress that they'll experience. Sometimes, the parent even criticizes the child's choices in an attempt to keep the child home or close to them, because they might actually see that their child growing up, leaving the home, they might see it as a form of abandonment, like a lot of emotionally immature parents do. So by keeping them small, might keep them closer, might decrease their worry and their risk, the parent that is, of feeling abandoned or of actually getting abandoned. Now, in reality, this type of critical parenting creates a lot of deep-rooted shame, and it is very damaging for our self-worth as children. Because the most important person in our life, in childhood, our parent, is so critical and is so harsh with us that we end up believing that we're not worthy at all, and that we might never be able to reach our potential. We might not even believe we have potential. Not because we're not talented or that we're not capable, but because we've been conditioned to believe that it's actually not even worth trying at all. The fifth type of emotionally immature parent is what I'm calling an approval-seeking parent. Now, this parent is always seeking validation from their child. They might be overly focused on being friends with their child, best friends with their child even, or being liked. They might struggle to set boundaries. They might struggle to follow through with natural consequences, or they might struggle to do anything at all that might even in the littlest, smallest way upset their child. Now, it is extremely important for all parents to be able to set boundaries and limits with their developing children to help them learn what's safe and what's unsafe. And because these approval-seeking parents sometimes actually even view their child as a peer to them, they might end up overstepping boundaries by oversharing things with them that aren't appropriate or that aren't healthy. The parent might end up leaning on their child for advice or for support about things that their children aren't in any space developmentally or immaturely to be able to deal with, like helping with their marriage, supporting them through financial issues, or anything else that's too developmentally mature for the child to actually be able to provide support around. As a result, children of approval-seeking parents end up feeling overly responsible for the outcomes of their parents' life, sometimes of anyone's life who they're in a relationship with, and might end up struggling to have the natural separation that we all need in healthy relationships. So these are the 5 types of different emotionally immature parents. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If anyone sticks out, which of these emotionally immature parents did you experience yourself? Leave it below.